So the title of our program tonight is The Death and Life of Local Journalism. I'm Ed Miller. I'm the editor of our local weekly, the Provincetown Independent, in print and online. Thank you. We cover the 4 towns of the Outer Cape. I got my first newspaper job when I was 5, selling papers to commuters at the train station in Teaneck, New Jersey, where I grew up. I started my first small-town weekly paper in 1973 in Harvard, Massachusetts, small town north of Worcester, right after graduating from college. Teresa and I launched the Independent in 2019, so 3 years and 8 months ago now, after I had been an editor at the Provincetown Banner for 4 years. The Banner was at that time owned by a private equity company, Gatehouse Media, now known as Gannett. Some people thought we were crazy to start a print newspaper, and of course they were right. But we're still here, somewhat crazier than we were before. Our current paid weekly circulation is about 5,500. The New England Newspaper and Press Association named the Indy Newspaper of the Year for 2022. Some of our excellent staff people are here tonight. To my left is Teresa Parker, my beloved partner in everything. She's the publisher of The Independent. Among many other responsibilities, she oversees its business operations, advertising, sales, and marketing. She writes the Indy's twice-weekly email newsletter, which goes out to 5,899 subscribers and has a 64% open rate. She edits the newspaper's award-winning Inside Out section. And so, for example, in today's edition of The Independent, she wrote about Alice Gong's sushi-making technique.
I put the wrong number of sheets of nori in there. I'm sorry. But
Proofreading error.
Proofreading error.
She also wrote about how Sean Fiedler and Josh Butts eloped to Boston on the ferry last weekend and got married quietly at Old South Church. Teresa was born in Oklahoma City, graduated from Georgetown and Harvard Graduate School of Education. Before launching The Independent in 2019, she was director of special projects at Education Development Center in Newton, then senior manager at the Ernst & Young Center for Business and Innovation in Cambridge, and for 15 years was proprietor of her own small travel business, Spanish Journeys, taking people on food and wine tours throughout Spain. Every once in a while, she would let me be the driver. Next in our panel is Jane Seagrave. Before Teresa and I launched The Independent, we consulted at length with a few trusted advisors in the newspaper business. One of them was Jane. She is the publisher of the 177-year-old Vineyard Gazette on the island of Martha's Vineyard, one of the most... The Gazette has its own printing press. We're very jealous about that. The Gazette is one of the most distinguished independent weekly newspapers in New England. Jane is also president of the Massachusetts Newspaper Publishers Association. Before coming to the Gazette in 2011, she was senior vice president and chief revenue officer for the Associated Press in New York City. She was lured to the Vineyard by Jerome and Nancy Kohlberg, who bought the paper shortly before that from the Reston family. James and Sally Reston had bought the paper from the old editor, Henry Beadle Huff, who I knew. Jane's journalism career spans 3 decades on both the editorial and business sides of the industry. She was director of publications for the Massachusetts Municipal Association.
God, you're going way into ancient
where I found out she wrote a handbook for selectmen.
I did. I can't believe you know this.
She spent 6 years as an AP reporter. In 1987, she went to work for Lawyers Weekly Publications in Boston. Later, she served as chief executive officer of localbusiness.com and chief online strategy consultant for American Lawyer Media in New York. From 2003 to 2011, she was at the AP as a director in new media markets, that is, the internet, and then as a senior vice president in global product development, including presiding over the transformation of AP from a wire service to a multimedia digital news provider. Jane was born in Fall River, grew up in Connecticut and Maine, and graduated from Bowdoin College.
Way more. You don't need to know any of this, honestly.
She has a master's in public administration from the Kennedy School at Harvard. And to Jane's left is Adam Moss. Adam is one of the most celebrated and esteemed editors in American journalism. He was editor-in-chief of New York Magazine from 2004 to 2019 and is widely credited with restoring the magazine's brilliance that it had achieved under founder Clay Felker. During Adam's tenure, New York won 40 national magazine awards, more than any other publication. Before that, in the late 1980s, he started and folded a local New York City arts and culture weekly called 7 Days. Though it lasted only 2 years, it had a lasting influence on local journalism in New York and beyond. A week after it went out of business in the 1990 recession, it won a National Magazine Award for General Excellence. In a 1999 profile of Adam in New York Magazine, before he went to the magazine, Michael Wolff wrote, quote, "It is hard to overstate what kind of magazine world hero Moss became with 7 Days and its particular pop culture idiom, and what kind of success failure can be." Soon afterward, Adam was hired by the New York Times and assigned the task of rethinking its local coverage. He became editor of the New York Times Magazine and was responsible for the book review, culture, and style sections. Advertising Age named him Editor of the Year in 2001 for his Times Magazine work, and again in 2007 and 2017 for his work at New York. He grew up on Long Island, graduated in 1979 from Oberlin College, which also gave him an honorary Doctor of Humanities in 2005. We're really excited to be up here with all these people to talk about what's going on in the world of local journalism. And I thought I would just... I'm not going to moderate this. We're just going to kind of talk to each other and ask each other questions and have you ask us questions. But we thought maybe we would start with the question of what makes local journalism succeed or fail, and how does that relate to deciding what to write about and what people want and or need to read about in their local paper. Adam, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, my experience is so not like the experience you guys have. Our locality was New York City, which functions a whole lot differently than Cape Cod or Provincetown or Martha's Vineyard particularly. And in that case, which I think, there were a lot of different factors for why local journalism declined. One of those was economic. All of them were really economic. in the sense that the advertising business, which had been funding journalism, was no longer really particularly interested in the local reader. They were interested in the national reader. That's where the money was. And that, particularly once the internet came along and allowed publications to have scale, there was a kind of momentum towards big and away from small. That was one factor. Another factor was actually that once the internet came along, it became clear through the metrics that a computer can give you that readers in New York City were not all that interested in New York City in certain senses. They didn't really care about the city council. They didn't care. They cared about the issues that were near and dear and close and personal to them. But in terms of the sorts of things that used to make civic local journalism, there was just not a whole lot of reader appetite for it, or at least not enough of one to support a business. And then I think the last thing, which is interesting to me, and I think this is different on the Cape, was that people in general, over time, had less community ties, that they were more attached to a kind of broader sense of identity than their local community afforded them. So, the chain stores changed the fabric, of course, of what it was like to walk on the street, and the internet and then eventually social media gave them a different kind of community to belong to, rather than the physical community that they were part of. All of these things, I think, contributed to, in New York City, the decline of viable local journalism. In my particular case, we tried to counter that in various different ways. I mean, 7 Days was this, which I'm sure none of you have ever heard of or have read, was a kind of strange attempt to make a kind of personal journalism work. It was kind of like weird. We were all kids, and we didn't know any better, and so we created this kind of pre-bloggy conversational thing where everything was filtered through kind of confessional experience that had its own weird personality and character, and for that reason I think functioned more as a kind of entertainment or literary experience than it did coverage in the way that you guys do that. So, and as you had mentioned, it was a big failure as well. So but it was an interesting failure to me. And anyway, I won't go on because I think that really people are here to hear about you guys. But there is something very particular and wonderful about the way that the Cape communities work and the way they can support businesses and enterprises like yours.
Yeah, well, one of the things we talked about in discussing this panel was that, in a certain sense, local journalism isn't just about a locality, a physical location in the world, but about the idea of the place, so that New York is not just the place New York, it's a state of mind that people anywhere might really be interested in. And I think the same thing really is true for Martha's Vineyard and for Provincetown and Outer Cape Cod. So one question is, does that apply everywhere, or is it really just that we're lucky in having chosen to work in these kinds of places?
Let me pick up on a couple of things that Adam said. I think, we're 177 years old, and in some ways look very like what we looked like back in the beginning. But newspapers do occupy a different place than they used to. They have to. Breaking news is now well known before you get your weekly newspaper. So you have to think about how you cover things in a way that will be relevant to people reading after they already think they know everything. And part of that is fact checking and making sure that what may have been rumored out there is actually factually checked and based. Part of it is adding context and history in some cases. But to your point, I think about we think we're providing a certain view of the vineyard. I mean, we have an actual sense that the vineyard is a good place. So we our coverage promotes the good things that are happening. Not to say we don't cover crime and everything else, but there is a sort of an ethic about our coverage that we provide things we think you need to know so that you can be a useful citizen of the world. But some of these things are choices, which is interesting. You think you pick up the local newspaper, it's got everything you need to know. You're making choices all the time in actually what you're covering. And I think we among ourselves have been talking about how those choices are made, and that's an interesting area. Maybe you could talk about for the Independent.
Teresa.
Well, I mean, I guess one interesting thing about our potentially special magicalness of New York and Martha's Vineyard and Provincetown or Cape Cod is that there are people who aren't here who have an image of this place, or who want to be here or wish they were here or came here once and want to remember it. So maybe that doesn't happen in Uvalde. And, so we're lucky that way. But I also think that it places a certain burden on us to think about. I mean, we talk openly in our newsroom about let's make sure we run the soup kitchen stories before all the summer people leave, so they can see that there's a story of hunger here in this place that they have an image of, and that image often won't include hunger here. So I think, and let's go ahead and talk about the heroin addiction. It's really important to have, if we're going to have this larger community of readers who want to participate in knowing this place, I think we have to sort of give each other the beauty and the good things, but also welcome other people's understanding of what's hard here. And so I think there's that kind of comes with an obligation. And what's been interesting for us, I think, is that the readers from away, I think, appreciate that. I don't get the sense that people are like, oh my God, I don't want to know that Provincetown. Quite the opposite. I think people who are loving this place want a richness to that love, not just a fake, pretty place.
One of the questions that this raises is, how do we even know what people want to read? And of course, now that we have all of the online analytics, we can see what stories people are clicking on our website. And in many ways, that's become the driver of what gets published in many places. But I think all of us on this panel have strong reservations about.
I could be writing the shark sighting weekly. I have great traffic. It really is. I mean, I look at Google Analytics all the time, and I ignore it about 50% of the time because everyone wants to know robberies, shark sightings,
You just had the one robbery.
Oh, no, we have another. We have another. Believe it or not, another person from Martha's Vineyard has robbed another bank this week.
Copycat.
Where did he not get the memo?
But do you not go to town on a story like that? If there's obvious like reader interest in something, do you deliberately deny the reader?
Absolutely
there?
not. No. I mean, those stories are golden, but but I'm not driven by trying to get clicks. You can't be. You take them in. I mean, that's just a great story. We had. This crazy armed robbery of a bank on an island. Why would you? Where's your escape route? That's a great story.
But I mean, do you feel? I guess my question is: do you feel that your civic interests and your interests journalism has always been a sort of weird combination of public service and entertainment. I mean, even the New York Times is that. And do you feel that they're in competition in a small town like this?
Wow.
Like these.
Sometimes they are, yes. But I think most of the time they're not. I mean, I think we try and do both, really. And it's like, when we had a bunch of focus groups before we started the Independent where we asked people, what they wanted to see in a new local paper. And one person said, just be sure not to make it all spinach and kale. And, we try that. I think it's really important. And it's one of the things that I think is a great strength of local journalism right now at a time when the world news and the national news is so frightening and depressing that we have a lot of really fun stories here. I mean, people here are great by and large. There's a few nuts, but
Those are good too.
Those are good too. But
good copy.
Yeah.
I think that we want people to read the paper every week and feel good about being connected to this community and the people here. And so that drives a lot of the editorial decisions that we make. It doesn't mean that we don't report on, the crime stories. And
I think, when we first started, one of my fears, because I didn't come from newspapers, was, oh my God, we're going to run out of stories. Like, it's a really good first couple of weeks, and then what? And it turns out that's not true. Like, there's plenty. There's always plenty. And there's always more, really, than what our staff can handle. And so, and also, we don't have very much time on these analytics. I'm telling you, that really is. So Ed secretly looks at baseball scores and stuff, and secretly looks at, the fact that the shark story has more clicks. But actually, we don't have any staff person assigned to figuring out trends or anything. We can't. We don't have time. What we do have time for is our weekly editorial meeting, and the people who write the stories are human beings who live here. And so they come with things that they're interested in, or sometimes not. Like there's the story of the goose poop. Somebody, people, it's great to get tips, is very fun. People write and say, I hear the goose poop in Long Pond. We'll give you a foot fungus. I've got it myself. And so for like 6 months, every new writer who started with us, every college student, we said, okay, goose poop story. And they would say no. So we can't publish that. I mean, we actually have to convince people to write some stories. But Sam recently went to cop school in Wellfleet for a couple of months. Painful experience. Almost didn't write about it, but did. So the stories are more coming from, I think, experience. And when we're shorthanded and complain that we're shorthanded, one suggestion that is frequently made is that we should just have people work remote. Just there's good writers out there, far, far away. It doesn't work for a local newspaper. It just can't.
And I want to ask Adam, because you really did revolutionize coverage. You did in New York. How did you decide what to cover?
Well, it was such a different problem. I mean, it was, in many ways we imagine New York as in the sort of continuum of what Clay Felker, who founded the magazine, he had this principle that New York was not concrete. New York was a sensibility. There was a kind of personality or idea of New York City, and that was something when I got there and the staff I assembled at that point, we had a very particular kind of reader in mind who was, skeptical, hard to convince, funny, a little leftish. There was a profile of this person, and so it was kind of, we were in constant dialogue with this person, and we would try as best as we could to inhabit. I mean, we were not averse to trying to pander to this person, to try to figure out what is this person actually interested in and create stories. And they were called stories for a reason. I mean, we were trying very much to interest people. We did, the sort of civic aspect of what we did was, I think, implicit, because one of the aspects of being a New Yorker was that you have some sense of responsibility to a commonality. There's that was part of the ethic of being a New Yorker. So that there was in there, but basically we were just trying to keep you riveted.
I don't think that's entirely different, though.
Yeah.
When you do any publication, you have to have an idea of who you're doing it for.
Absolutely.
And it may be a slightly different profile for us, but I mean, we're writing for people who are citizens of Martha's Vineyard, that are not just casual. We get casual visitors, but that's not really who we're writing for. We're writing for people who care about, preserving the environment. We're very big on that. Care about the sea life around us. Care about what happens at town meeting. And that's a it's not a left. It tends to be left leaning.
Well, I was actually curious about that. You all run newspapers in a very politically coherent context. I mean, does that come into your head?
Well, it's funny. Politics in the normal sense of like party politics don't actually come up very often here. It's yes, on the state and county level sometimes. And we had a great story after the last presidential election about how there was an absolutely unbroken sequence along Route 6 from Provincetown to Bourne, where each town in order had a decreasing number of voters for Biden.
Easier put the other way.
Yeah, right. So Provincetown voted for only 7% voted for Trump in Provincetown.
Did anyone in here vote for Trump? I'm just curious.
But, I did think that would be a good story. I'd like to find that 7%.
Well, we have the January 6th guy. We told his story. So far, only one.
But yeah, we do try and write a lot about local affairs, political and governmental affairs. We pander to people who are passionate about the inclusionary zoning bylaw and that kind of thing. And it's, they don't get that many clicks necessarily, but we do feel that that's really important part of our mission, is to cover what's going on at town hall.
What do you not cover? What is outside your sort of palette of coverage? We talked
talked
before
about
as we were
crime.
walking in. When the Banner used to have a police blotter, which was, I think, probably its most popular feature. And then when you started the Independent, you chose not to carry that forth.
Yeah, we talked a lot about coverage of crime and police affairs, and decided that at least the old way that the Banner did the police blotter was really not ethical, because anybody who was arrested got listed in the paper, and then there was no follow-up. So if the charges were dropped, you had no way of knowing, you got no context. It was just the bare facts that so-and-so was arrested for such and such. And
But we made an exception. We had one college student writer who was really interested in police and the courts and all of that. And she just said, I'm going to go every single day to the Orleans District Court, whether you like it or not. And we said, okay, you can do that as long as you write other stories, no matter what. So she went. And over the course of a year, she produced maybe 6 pretty excellent stories about crime that the whole group had to talk about a little bit to figure out whether there was a lot of stuff we didn't publish. But things like that, ultimately the revelation over the course of the year was that alcoholism was the major reason for a whole bunch of stuff in the courts. Becomes a story about alcoholism.
Which is so interesting and true and important.
Yeah. So, she's gone. I don't know why. And
she went back to college.
We don't have that person right now. So the texture of, I think also our obligation to be that paper that we were when Joe was writing those stories, then the minute she's gone, we're not that same paper anymore. But we don't have the wherewithal to say, oh, okay, we need the new crime reporter. We can't. But if somebody comes along who's interested in something else, like turtles, we can do that.
Anybody here interested in writing about turtles?
Or crime. We're not quite as personality driven. I don't know how to describe it.
You have more staff than we do.
We have more staff, and it's true. And there are certain things we cover, and maybe we overcover them. I mean, we cover pretty much every. There's 6 towns on Martha's Vineyard, oddly enough. They all have their boards of selectmen. They have police departments. They have conservation.
Separate police departments?
Oh yeah, I mean everything is 6 times. There are only 20,000 year-round residents, or 25 possibly, but there's 6 of everything, and we try to cover 6 of everything, and it is exhausting, and it does strain resources. And so you asked, how do you do it all? You can't do it all, so you're naturally selective, and we try to cover every selectmen's meeting. But it is, I mean, it is true. Everyone refers to this as the newspaper of record, which just makes me laugh, because what are we recording? I mean, that used to be a concept in journalism when there was nothing but resources, and there just isn't now. You try to record as much of it as you can, but it is we're all strapped for resources. It's by its nature limited.
Yeah.
So does on the spinach and kale question, we do feel obligated to do that. And part of the point we've been making is that that's part of how we can survive, because no one else is doing that. You're looking at your little apple feed for stuff, and you are not going to find what happened at the select board meeting. So it's our niche. And so we can't give that up. But also, does it matter, I think, is still a really important question.
I mean, it's interesting. What happens at the select board meeting gets more coverage than what happens in the New York City Council, just because of the mechanics of the way that these places are covered.
Mm-hmm.
That does not more or less. I mean, there are places. There's a digital magazine called The City that tries to fill some of the gaps there too. But it's, it's a completely different mechanism of coverage, which gets to, I think, again, the particular nature of the communities that you guys serve.
And one of the things you said earlier I thought was interesting, that people are less, in New York, certainly identify less with New York as the place they live, I suppose, and I think that's true. The notion of community has eroded in general, and in some of these small towns, it still has enough vitality that people do care what happens where they live. They're not moving, for example, every couple of years. They have roots there. A lot of New Yorkers are probably in transit.
Absolutely.
But the other one of the points I think you made, Teresa, was out of my head almost as soon as I brought it up. It'll come back to me.
Well, I think I would say maybe we could replace. So I think one thing we're doing, Bob Finch, the naturalist, told us this. He said, you're doing something real. It's so interesting because it's real. And I wonder if the realness can sort of semi-replace community.
Oh, that was the point. And actually, I think it was Ed that said it, that somehow, and this is true for us, somehow the newspaper itself becomes the vehicle of community. And I sense that that's what's happening here, because you've got people who are hungry for something that...
I think that's absolutely true, yeah.
Introduces you to your neighbors, tells you what's going on. It's sort of a currency you can use in talking to people. We certainly find that. We have events that people come to, and they consider it kind of the way they define themselves.
As far as the question of doing something real, that makes me think about this whole issue of being in print or not. And we made a decision early on that we wanted to be a print newspaper. We thought that was important for a bunch of reasons. But many people told us and continue to tell us that print is over or will soon be over as soon as a few more baby boomers die. And it's a lost cause. Eventually, everything will just be online. But my sense is that there is a huge difference between being able to hold a newspaper in your hands and just reading it on your phone or your screen. And I think that we see that happening also in relation to books. And some other aspects of culture where I don't think print newspapers are over, especially the weekly newspaper. I think that there's a good argument for weekly newspapers being printed. And of course, you have to be online as well. One of the things we decided to do from the beginning was to charge more for a digital-only subscription than for a print plus digital subscription. And some people find that incomprehensible, but it makes sense because print subscribers are what enable us to sell print advertising. And print advertising is a huge part of our revenue stream. We couldn't do the paper without it.
Can you guys bring us through the origin story of the Independent? I mean, it's an amazing story. How you started something from nothing and managed to slay the existing publication, the Banner, which was, even if faltering, was a pretty ingrained habit in this town and surrounding towns. Tell your story.
What would you say, Teresa?
Well, what was your, where did it start? What was your, what did you reject? What was your driving mission?
Well, we're newspaper readers, kind of. So part of it is just living here, reading the paper and saying, something happened, I wish I knew what. So it wasn't satisfying.
Yeah.
So it was sort of just a drive to have something more satisfying. Ed went to work at the Banner, which was going to be like his retirement job. It was going to be cake, and it was going to be down the street, and it didn't pay that well, but it was great. But then he got dissatisfied with what it was like on the inside of the Banner. And I think you can tell a little.
And then you plotted this in secret. That's
we
what
did.
you were
We
just
plotted it in secret.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's a juicier story than.
Ed wrote an article that was published in the American Prospect under a pseudonym.
What was that?
Well,
Hildy Zenger.
Okay. We had the idea. Soon after I went to work at the Banner, I could see that Gatehouse Media, then the owner of it, was just sucking money out of that thing. And having started a couple of newspapers way back earlier, I thought, okay, I know how to do this. And I started doing some numbers and thinking, okay, this can work. And one of the first people actually that we went to see with the idea was Ike Williams, John Taylor Williams, who was the #1 newspaper broker in New England, and who has, lives in Boston and in Wellfleet. And we went to see him at his office in Boston and said, we have this idea, we want to start a newspaper for the Outer Cape. And kind of thinking he's going to say, that's nuts. And he said, that's a great idea.
Okay,
So,
part 2 of his advice. Get 4 people to each give you $400,000 and you're done. That did not happen.
No, that did not happen.
No.
But at a certain point, after we worked on it some more, Ike called up and said, okay, it's time for you to go talk to Bob Kuttner. Bob is the founder, co-editor of American Prospect, teaches at Brandeis, has a house in Truro, and we did, and right away Bob said, I'm really interested in this whole thing of what's happening in the newspaper business, and in particular how private equity has been, gutting newspapers all over the country. He said, well, so I was working for Gatehouse at the time. He said, will you write an article about this with me, and you can do it under a pseudonym so, you won't get fired. And he came up with the pseudonym Hildy Zenger. So Hildy Zenger. So Hildy was for Hildy Johnson from the movie The Front Page.
Yeah.
And Zenger, of course, is John Peter Zenger, who was the printer in New York in the 1700s, whose libel case for criticizing the colonial governor established the principle of independent press in the United States, when the judge instructed the jury to come back with a guilty verdict because he admitted the crime, criticizing the governor, and the jury came back and said, no way, that he's not guilty because you have to be able to criticize the government. And anyway, that was Hildy Zenger. And
one thing we told Adam that Adam liked was that we kind of worked on researching and talking to people for probably 3 years, and trying to find funds and stuff. And during that time, because Ed had that job, we told everyone, please don't tell anyone about this. And you think that these towns thrive on gossip. But when we said we need this job and we can't lose this job right now, it worked. Nobody
said anything.
said anything.
Yeah, and the Outer Cape thrives on gossip, but people also do recognize that you need your job in order to be able to live here. So that did work. But we did eventually come up with enough funding to launch the paper in 2019 with a business plan that had us breaking even in year 5. And with a goal of a paid circulation of 7,500 and a staff of 20. Now, we're more than halfway on our circulation goal. We're doing quite well with advertising. The hardest thing really has been finding people to work for us.
We're
of
so
course,
mean.
We're
You probably were really mean as an editor.
Well, one thing I'm like amazed to hear you say that you let anyone write whatever they want, because that is shocking to me. And it sounds like a wonderful place to work. You should all work for the Independent. What an amazing set of bosses you have.
Well, we don't let people write whatever they want. That wasn't exactly right. But we do try and nurture the writers and get them to write about things they care about, and get them to care about the things we care about. Thank you so much for coming.